Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
It's the Maryland Crabs, and we're super high right now.
Oh, yeah, man. I'm just not into it.
I wish we were super high right now. But we were going to talk marijuana and cannabis and all that.
We are. We like that.
Yeah, it was actually, but it's not the exciting part. Well, it is the exciting part, depending on who you are, but it is the banking side of it, because as we'll get into, we have a company that is meeting the demand of all these cannabis companies that are killing it right now, but don't have any way to bank their money. I almost said launder, but
yeah, the cannabis industry is just really growing, and we've talked to that when we talked to Caroline Phillips before with the National Cannabis Festival. We talked about it when we talked to Anne Arundel County Community College, looking to do a whole curriculum based around it. We've spoken with the people that do the dispensaries, and it's a complex business.
And I was thinking about this on the ride over here. So much has happened just in the last 10 years that I never thought would happen, or if it did, it was going to happen a lot slower. I'm talking about, like, gay marriage, for example, how fast that moved. And cannabis, I knew someday we were going to unclench our butts a little bit about it as a country, but it's happening so fast right now that some of the estimates we talk about as far as full legalization on a federal level, I think maybe we're overestimating how long it's going to take. But it's a big business. It's $1 billion in Colorado. It's, I think, 9 billion or 10 billion nationwide.
I think you'll see probably within 5 years here in Maryland, you'll see it legalized recreationally.
Again, I think it's going to be sooner than that. I'll bet I would go 18 months.
Wow.
I do. Because here's what's going to happen. We talk about this, and is that it's the same thing that happened with gambling, is that whenever you have one state in the Mid-Atlantic that all of a sudden taps into untapped revenue, the others have to fall in line, or they're going to lose all that revenue from their own residents.
It's not hard for me to get to Delaware or to Pennsylvania or
West Virginia
or Virginia or DC.
Exactly. That's what happened with gambling. Everyone had to jump on it to get that money. But the money is the key to it, because they can't bank this money because it runs afoul of federal regulations.
Well, I mean, the federal regulations in the banking industry are just absolutely absurd. I wouldn't even want to be in the banking industry. I mean, just to think about all the regulations that you have to put up with. And, I can't imagine what it would be with the cannabis industry. And I know that there's been a few banks here in Maryland, one of them being right here in Annapolis, Severn Bank, that has figured a way to work around or work with the regulations. And we were all set to talk with them. And then they sort of shut down when President Trump was elected because they weren't quite sure what direction the administration was going to go with the cannabis legislation.
Yeah, because he's not really that opposed to it, much to my surprise. In fact, he could really pull out a pretty big win if he suddenly made this one of his keystone issues. I think he could make up a lot of ground. But in the meantime, we talked to some folks at Solvent,
which is a new startup here in Annapolis. It's Solvent. It might be LLC or something like that formerly, but it's solvent.io is their website, because all of those .coms and .nets and .orgs are probably all taken. And solvent is a pretty popular word, I would think.
Yeah, they're clean, right?
Yeah, but this is Brian Meyer, who is the founder of Capital SUP, or SUP.
What's up?
And he went in with some partners, and they're working out of the Commons, where we do a lot of our recording, and they're developing financial solutions for businesses in the cannabis industry, whether it is the growers, the processors, or the stores, the dispensaries, to be able to do that and to be able to keep the regulations in check as it moves through, as we figure out how the hell to do it.
Now, they're a startup, and I think what I saw last is they'd raised between $800,000 and $1 million, I think, which is, good seed money. Mm-hmm. And I think their goal was around 10 million for what they want to do. But they are going to be a niche, and they tell us that there's not many other companies that do what they do. And apparently it's not just the idea of how to do this, but it's all proprietary, because it's going to be the products that go along with that. It's the tracking, it's the finance itself, it's understanding the regulations, not ways around them, but working within compliance.
Well, I think if you look at anything in the marijuana industry, certainly here in Maryland anyhow, but mostly in the United States, is a niche industry. It's so new. We're figuring this out. So you've got brand new people. I mean, I know you've got Brand Joint Marketing, which is a marketing firm here in Annapolis based solely on marijuana.
Do you really have to market weed?
Yeah.
I think it just kind of sells itself.
Well, I mean, we talk to people that are in all sorts of ancillary businesses that you never would have thought would have existed, that weed has become medicinally acceptable. And when it comes recreationally acceptable, it's going to be even more.
Yeah, I think we have some hurdles to overcome with that just in perception. I think that's more of a conservative thing. And, it's funny. Older people tend to be conservatives, and the older people we're talking about now are baby boomers, and baby boomers were synonymous with marijuana use in the 60s. They certainly, they didn't pioneer it, but they certainly perfected it. So I'm a little weirded out that you have baby boomers who are kind of controlling everything right now that have a problem with marijuana use.
I don't know. Well, I'll tell you what, I have a feeling that this one's going to be a deep podcast, probably a little bit over my head, which isn't not hard to do.
No.
But I'm very interested in following this and seeing how this is. This is solvent.io is their website. And we're going to be talking with Brian Meyer, who is the co-founder, along with one of the other co-founders, Tony Richards, and see what they have to say.
And let's see if I can get them off track. I bet I can.
Hey, we're back here at the Commons again, which we love to be here, but we are with two of the 5 founders of a new company based here in Annapolis that is, if not making waves already, will be making waves fairly soon.
Let's hope so.
Industry that is certainly booming, and we have spoken with professors at Anne Arundel Community College that are looking to develop a curriculum around this product. We've spoken with a wonderful woman out of D.C. that has organized festivals around this product. And we have not spoken to the elusive business owner that owns a store that sells the product yet. But we're talking about the cannabis industry, and we are here at Solvent, which is their website is solvent.io because .com and .net and all those are probably already taken at this point in 2019. So how are you guys doing?
Good.
We're
Thanks
great.
for having us.
In the simplest terms, what is Solvent?
So Solvent de-risks cannabis for banks so that banks feel confident on taking loans and providing merchant services to the industry.
And that's an issue because right now cannabis on a federal level is still illegal.
It is illegal, but in states, well, to be fair, there are some regulations that are pretty vague for banks to be able to bank cannabis. And a lot of them, since it's not penned in stone, feel like they're still taking a risk in servicing cannabis. But a lot of them see this as a community safety issue and want to provide services to the cannabis industry just to support their community. And it's pretty admirable.
I think it's amazing at all of as medical cannabis, which is what we're seeing here in Maryland now, and I mean we're on the road to a recreational use of it. I think.
Fingers crossed.
Certainly in my lifetime, I think we're going to see it.
That's a great bet, is to actually get a poll going to say, like, when is it actually going to get legalized? Because I've talked to about 100 different people about it, and I've gotten 100 different answers.
Yeah, but you would have to think that it's going to happen in the next couple of years.
Well, I would agree to disagree. So here's my theory. So kind of jumping ahead of the legislation part, is one of the big pieces of legislation is this Safe Banking Act, which basically allows the states to mandate their own laws regarding cannabis. And it takes away the federal government from being able to intervene. And so
from a banking perspective.
From the banking perspective, that's huge because a lot of the federally insured banks cannot play in the space. And so the institutions that are servicing the industry are credit unions and small community banks.
So for anyone who's not following the issue, what that means is that by state, whether it be medicinal or recreational legalization of cannabis, that's all well and good. But the companies that purvey the cannabis can't bank the money because it then becomes a federal issue.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a gray area to that. But so the Safe Banking Act is a huge piece of legislation being talked about at the federal government. It has wide bipartisan support. Still unsure whether it's going to pass the Senate. It's been passed through the House several times. So that's one piece of that. From my perspective, legalizing cannabis recreationally is still a long ways away.
Do you really think so?
I think that, and my belief and several others that I've talked to is that medicinal cannabis will be legalized federally in the next couple of years. And then recreationally will take some more time. And one of the main reasons why is states have their own rules, they have their own taxes, they have their own laws, and to be able to pass products state to state with different tax rates, states aren't going to want. So Maryland won't want product going to Pennsylvania, going to Virginia. So they want all that product to stay in the state. They want the tax money that they're getting when cannabis is sold. So for instance, in Colorado, last year alone, they made the federal government, I think it was $1 billion that they generated from tax just from selling cannabis. I mean, that's massive. Oh, I'm sorry, not $1 billion, $100 million. They generated $1 billion in sales overall, but there's just so much with that to be able to pass that legally from a recreational perspective. And I think the way our government works with passing laws and legislation, my theory is it's either there's going to be a change in as a president and who controls the United States, or our current political atmosphere uses a bipartisan act like legalization of cannabis to throw it in at the last minute to potentially get the progressive voters in the United States that want to pass it. So that actually is, I think, something that could happen that would definitely accelerate the legalization of it.
And I think we're talking about the legalization of marijuana as if that's the product, but you guys specialize in the financial side of that, because it's a huge business right now, and from what I understand, there's also been a black market that has kind of emerged as well because the taxes are so high on it that.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of our taglines is legal businesses deserve legal banking. So the dispensaries, the grows, the processors in the state of Maryland and many other states are legal businesses. They wouldn't be up and running if they weren't, and so they deserve the same opportunity to bank like any other business. And part of our technology and part of our mission is to provide that, because right now banking is extremely limited all across the country. And the limited banking that's available is extremely costly. As an example, in Maryland, on average, it costs a dispensary owner over $30,000 to simply have a basic checking account, with no additional banking services.
All right, so Brian, walk me through this. So if I own a dispensary and I have people who are coming in, and in Maryland, medicinal marijuana, cannabis is legal. Someone comes in with a prescription for their anxiety or glaucoma or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, they cash out their registers or what have you, or they whatever they do. So what does the typical dispensary in Maryland do right now? Or anywhere to right now?
Yeah, so Maryland, in a lot of the newer markets, newer states, their programs are a bit more structured. In reference to like California, I mean, it's all over the place. They're having some major problems, to the point where I think only 30 to 40% of cannabis businesses in the state actually have bank accounts.
So what do?
They have their creative ways of holding their cash. Like, I know some businesses.
But it's not just cash. It's like, it's also credit. I mean, I know we're saying cash as if it was, just Sawbucks, that they're bringing in, but a lot of it's going to be credit and debit. So how do they process that as it is now?
Well, yeah. So that's a whole nother. So cannabis is a very cash intensive business because you cannot accept credit and debit cards. It is legal to process those transactions, so I'll get to in a second, but there is no technology that exists to allow a customer to walk into a dispensary to legally pay with a credit or debit card. And I'll tell you why, is because in cannabis, the financial institutions assume 100% of the risk in those transactions. And so if either one of you walked into a dispensary and swiped your credit card, that bank has no idea who you are, what you're purchasing, and where you're purchasing. And those are one of several data points the federal government, as Tony mentioned, in the 2014 Cole Memorandum that released what's called the FinTech Red Flag Guidelines, which are a set of data points that allows banks to bank cannabis, but like he said, they're very vague. And on top of that, there's no technology to allow them to be able to verify those data points specifically at the point of transaction.
So a great example of that
I'm not understanding this.
So a great example of that is there's one of the largest processors of CBD, which is legal,
right?
Is Elevon. Elevon's backed by U.S. Bank. It's an ISO.
For people who don't know, CBD is a derivative of cannabis plant, but it doesn't have the THC, which makes it an intoxicant.
Exactly. So totally legal. And what happened was they probably had 5,000 plus retail e-commerce CBD stores being processed in the United States, the largest one. And what happened was, and there's still some debates on the specifics, but a lot of these CBD companies also sell THC. So a dispensary it's the illegal version of cannabis,
right?
Which they got caught processing THC on a credit card terminal that was only supposed to have CBD. So they broke the rules. But the problem is, and what Brian's trying to describe is that who knows what product's being sold at a retail center.
So if I go to Pennsylvania, they have the sheets up in Pennsylvania, and they have a register there with a sign saying it is illegal to pay for alcohol at this register. So if I want to buy beer, I go to the register and they shake their heads and point to the other register, and we both have to walk over to that register to buy the beer. So is that the same thing?
Similar, but the idea is that if you have U.S. Bank who's going to take all the liability for processing transactions, they have no way of knowing who those people that they're allowing to process those as merchants, what products are actually processing, which is what comes back to you may come like Vegas, Reno, some places you'll see the people actually processing credit cards for THC, but on your statement it's going to be like an architect firm or an engineer.
I can swipe your credit card right now, and it could be for advertising, it could be for a bottle of water, it could be for a pound of weed.
Whatever, right?
So as far as the government's concerned, whether something is illegal or not, and also whether they get the taxes or not.
That's exactly right. And from Brian's perspective is that like if the U.S. government is going to make this legal, they're going to have to know that what's being processed can be tracked. And if a bank's going to be held liable for things that are being processed, they're going to have to know the product is CBD or THC and why.
So it's not illegal per se for the banks to process this. It's just that they don't want to be held liable. They don't want to be on the hook.
They just have no way of knowing.
So
that's the thing.
They have their hands up.
I have no clue. So what happened was Visa did an audit. Visa or U.S. Bank, I can't remember which one, did an audit. They caught somebody running THC through CBD because the numbers were exorbitantly high and kind of abnormal, because they do see that. They walked in. They actually did a secret shopper. They got caught. Visa squeezed U.S. Bank saying, hey, you disavow basically every regulation I gave you, and I gave you the opportunity to underwrite this, and now you are putting Visa's business in harm. And they shut down Elevon. So as of May 15th, everybody who was being processed CBD is now completely gone. And that's an example of, like, there are rules. So the government said, as long as you know what the product is, who the customer is, where they're purchasing within a certain amount they're purchasing per day or per week, that they show their ID, that they're segmented areas in a dispensary, like you have your proper license, everyone's done a background check, everyone has all these different rules so that they can control this environment. They literally don't have any way of proving it. For example, another one is the state of Maryland came out that only owners can own 4 licenses of any one type of cannabis-related business. So they can only own 4 dispensaries, 4 processors, or 4 grows. And so valid because people are basically hoarding all the licenses for themselves so that they can control the market. And the problem
sorry to interrupt, but for people that don't understand is like with any industry, right? You have your small businesses, people that have applied for a license, got a dispensary, potentially got vertically integrated, which means they got to grow, they got a processing, got a dispensary license.
That's a good point.
Then you have your corporate multi-state operators that have fundraised an insane amount of money that are going to each state and acquiring everything they can, because it's a land grab at the end of the day.
So they're buying.
When you say
licenses.
acquiring, are you talking about acquiring the dispensaries?
They're acquiring they're acquiring the licenses. They're acquiring the locations. Everything.
So Weeds R Us could be coming down here and taking care of the dispensary on West Street, or the one just buying it outright, and that would be a business.
What everyone's trying to do is big tobacco, big alcohol are sitting on the sidelines, big pharma, and they're waiting. And the minute this thing goes federally legal, they're going to buy everything. And so these multi-state operators...
But that would run afoul of antitrust pretty quick, wouldn't it?
I mean,
with all my legal
that's a great. I mean,
sure,
I'm giving you a non-legal kind of just sense of just general terms, like what their mission is.
Yeah, but there's ways around it. Like the threshold, for example, in the state of Maryland is that it's 5% or more in ownership. So if you own 5 dispensaries and you're over 5%, the crazy thing is that no one would actually know
5% of the whole
5% of the cap table of a specific dispensary. So what's crazy is that it's just coming back to what we're trying to describe is that there are plenty of rules and regulations to help mandate and properly bank and provide services in this industry to let this industry thrive. The problem is that they're restrictive in a way that makes it almost impossible for anyone to know anything, right? And now that's even overly accentuated because now they're pushing banks out of the equation. They're not willing to play, and it's forcing cash to happen, which even accentuates the problem even more because now I've got dispensary owner walking down the street with $150,000 in a backpack, showing up in the back of a bank and depositing that money, and the bank being like standoffish of, I'm going to take this money, but I really don't want anybody to know that I'm doing it. So really there's probably tons of banks out there that we don't even know that are trying to bank this industry but want no one to know about it.
I know that we had heard the Severn Bank right up the road from here is one of the few banks that came out initially, and I remember it was just before the election of President Trump because they weren't quite sure where the administration was going to go on a federal level, and I don't want to say they backed off from it, but they backed off from talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, Severn is one of 2 in the state of Maryland. They have the majority of of cannabis-related businesses in the state banking with them.
It's extremely forward-thinking, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, look. Alan Hyatt he's a lawyer. He's very successful in basically everything he touches. So he's a very smart man, and he set his program up and led the way to be able to take the majority of businesses in the state to bank under Severn. The other institution is Bulldog Federal Credit Union in Hagerstown. So they got in the space about a year and a half ago. And so they're the second institution publicly taking cannabis money. Now, I've heard several other institutions under the table that are, taking a client here or there, but those are the 2 big ones.
Well, you may know this. I don't know whether this is still in effect, but I know at one point banks used to, if there was any kind of a cash deposit in excess of $10,000, the banks needed to report that to the IRS.
That still happens, yeah. CTRs.
Yeah, every time I deposit more than 10 grand, they think.
Yeah, there's 2 main reports that need to be filed. One is the CTR report, so anything over $10,000. The other one is the SAR reports. So it's basically... you can do it a number of different ways, but in a certain time period, you have to report every single transaction that went through the institution and report that to the federal government. And so you can either do that on like a 90-day batch, or you can do it in real time, which is part of our technology, is automatically sending that reporting information to the FinCEN, which is a regulatory body, on behalf of the institution, so that they don't have to worry about it, because it is a very tedious manual process.
Well, where does Solvent's product, the FinTech aspect of this? I mean, how does that actually fit into the process of a dispensary? I mean, how do we work with you?
And we're not talking about the growers, right? Because that's a whole separate issue.
Yeah, that is a separate.
Well, I guess it goes through everybody,
but it goes through everybody in terms of baking. So, what we've been trying to do from a FinTech perspective is create an ecosystem, right? So there's people who solve different pieces of this problem. There's like, I'm going to solve the SAR problem because you can't accurately report deposits and withdrawals from a specific bank account, or I'm going to provide some closed loop payment solution so that I can do a reverse debit, or you buy a gift card so you're 1 degree separated from the actual money, or I'm going to recategorize a transaction. So what we do is we actually have a bunch of different wedges. We call them wedges anyway. So when the payment happens, happens at the point of transaction, someone swipes their card, we take all the information that we can from that point of transaction. And this e-commerce as well. And what we do is we validate that transaction is legal, and we aggregate it using machine learning to know how often and what time that person does another transaction again.
What defines a legal transaction then?
Well, first off is the location. Is it within certain hours of the dispensary being open? So another problem would be is I came after hours, I snuck a friend in, we did a transaction at 9 o'clock at night after hours, for example.
Okay.
The certain amount of money that you can purchase per day, the amount of money you can purchase per week, per month, each bank has their own rules on that. So when we say compliant, there's part compliant of the government regulation, and then there's other what the bank's willing to accept as a compliant transaction, and everyone has their own kind of take on this situation.
Okay.
So that's one side of it, and then the other side of it is they have this idea in banking called KYC, and it's know your customer. And traditionally, you'll go sign up for a bank account and you'll fill out your information. They'll do a check on the check system or FINRA, OFAC, or your background, and they generally get to know who you are before they say, yes, I'm going to take your money and bank you. And
okay.
In the cannabis world, it's even accentuated even more. So if I wanted to onboard a dispensary in a bank, I need to know, obviously, the general business information. I need to see actual copies of the articles of incorporation, partnerships, fictitious filing, all that kind of stuff. I need to know all the vendors you're doing business with and their information. I need to know all your ACH, cash, withdrawal, wire, deposits and withdrawals. I need to know what products you're selling, and I need to actually get the COAs, which is a certificate of analysis that a lab provides that gives you the spectrum. So you said CBD and THC, so cannabis has a lot of different attributes to it, right? So I digress. All of this information goes into creating this persona, and then once the persona of that company has been created, then they do background checks on everybody. That's federal, national, state, county, city, civil, FINRA, OFAC, credit report.
How much does that cost?
So it's funny.
I'm just sitting here shaking my head.
So it costs you to just go through the process anywhere between $1,500 and $3,000 in our experience of banks that we're talking to, just to see if you're going to be accepted. And that's based loosely on how many owners you have. But if you have a massive cap table of 25 people that are all over, 5% or close to 5%, they're going to run the report on everybody. It's funny, non-disclosure.
It's like getting security clearance.
Yeah, it really is, and it's
seems a little bit more significant than a security.
Yeah, right. So that's really hard, and honestly, and to accentuate the problem, I keep using the word accentuate, but it takes 3 to 6 months to just get regular banking. And there are some people that came out tools to be able to do that faster, and that's kind of part of what our system does is we make it where it's a group effort. So you come to our system and you invite out all the people that are involved and say, hey, fill this one area out, and it becomes this manageable chunk where before there's the CEO or manager of the dispensary who's aggregating all of this information and putting it in PDFs and emailing files back and forth until they've given enough information where the bank feels confident. And it's not so much the bank wants to do it. It's the regulating bodies who they're trying to over communicate to say that we're trying to be as compliant as possible.
Well, certainly. I mean, they've got a bigger risk. I mean, they're dealing with far more businesses that are non-cannabis related.
Totally. They don't want to ruin it.
That's where the bulk of their money is at
absolutely.
This point.
Yep.
And, it's...
Yeah, but still, I mean, this is an emerging. I mean, what are you talking about nationally? I think it's something like we're at $6 billion now.
So depending on where you find this information, from what I get my information from, in 2019, we're projected to be about a $9 billion industry, and that is CBD and cannabis.
Right.
In the next 3 to 4 years, collectively, that number will go north of $40 billion.
Is cannabis still Schedule 1? Or is that, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just look at the way the industry has really grown. I mean, 3 years ago, we had no dispensaries in Anne Arundel County. Right now, we've got 3, I believe, that are open. We've got one up in Linthicum, one in Edgewater, and one here in Annapolis.
Is Crofton in Anne Arundel County?
Where?
Is Crofton in Anne Arundel?
Crofton's Anne Arundel County.
Yeah, so they just opened one. So I think we're up to 4, maybe 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know there's another one that they're trying to open up over the bowling alley in Annapolis, which is, I guess, sort of a Crownsville area as well. But I mean, and we look at, there's a place right across the street here from the Commons,
Java Jane. Java Jane.
CBD coffee shop.
Hey,
I didn't know that.
So yeah, and it's good. Java Jane's legit.
So what is it, out of curiosity?
And I look at
it's
in Annapolis, over in the design district, there's a marketing firm. It's called Brand Joint Marketing, which is specifically for
Peppermill, right?
Yeah. It's Peppermill, Pepper Jam.
Jennifer Culpepper.
She's amazing too. Yeah.
I mean, so you see where this is going. I've talked to several people that are in these ancillary industries that are there. I mean, there's one guy I know that is getting into just packaging of consumables.
It's huge industry right now, packaging.
And I'm like, wow, this is just something that you don't think about. And when you sit there and say we're at $9 billion, looking to go to $40 billion, that doesn't surprise me in the least. And it might even be an underestimate.
Well, this is something also, I think it's crossing political lines. I mean, I think that, you would talk about, look at all the baby boomers who in the 60s were the turn on, tune in, drop out.
Yeah.
And they've gotten older and they've gotten more conservative and everything. But, it's still not the stigma that it was.
It's not, but it's funny because we speak often with the associations in cannabis, especially there's a couple of them in DC and Arlington area, and these associations basically help support credit unions, small banks on answering common questions they would have. So they would call and say, how do I bank cannabis? And most of the time they don't actually have the answer, but they're advocating these banks and credit unions to actually get involved. So they'll go to these big conferences of about 500 to 1,000 CEOs of credit unions in one room, and they'll start holding up pictures. And the pictures are CEO owners of dispensaries, processors, and grows that say, look, these guys don't have neck tattoos. Right. They actually shave. They dress nice. Like, they're not who you think they are.
Yeah, that's one of the things that just really pisses me off is this concept that this is where the crackheads are all going to congregate. Yeah. I'm going to call out Rhonda Pindell-Charles, who's Annapolis' alderwoman, who fought tooth and nail for the dispensary on West Street, saying, oh my gosh, what's it going to do to the neighborhood and everything else. And it's technically in the county, so it's just across the line. I get that. But I'm like, no, I mean, the weed that you're buying in these places is top of the line, and it's expensive.
It's not the way to get it from the 70s.
Well, it's not even that. Like, I would challenge you need your medical card to walk in. Well, actually, no, you don't. I mean, the one on West Street, you can walk in without your medical card, but
you can't walk in back without it.
You can't walk in the back, but I would say anyone that has questions about it to just go and just walk in that dispensary.
I'm gonna.
And the experience that the majority of these businesses have created for medical patients is amazing. I mean, they've spent a lot of money creating a very professional, very welcoming experience. It's not like going to your local convenience store or vape store. I mean, they did a lot. I mean, there was a lot of thought and energy put into making this a place where you feel welcome.
You walk in, there's a receptionist there. They verify who you are and whatnot. Then you're taken back into another area where you're actually, it's a consultancy.
Yeah.
It's not a transactional type of a thing.
No.
Well, it's interesting. I think that the whole paradigm has shifted faster than I ever thought it would. I mean, I never thought I'd see this until I was much older than I am now, but it's happened so quickly. And it's funny, we have some of our friends, they have a podcast called Red Maryland, and they're a conservative podcast, and they talk about Maryland politics. And we were talking with them last year. I forget how we got on the subject. It's just because I like to argue. And and Greg, who listens, hey Greg, and we were talking about cannabis, and I was saying something like the bullshit about it being a gateway drug, and I have all the studies that show it's nonsense, and he said something that which I get, but he said, well, if you want to have a talk about the morality or the ethics behind this, then we can do that. We didn't have time for it, but and I thought about
that's a good one.
Yeah, and I thought about that carefully and thought, well, if we broke that down, like we're talking about the morality and ethics of, say, gambling, or the age of consent, or we can have discussions about whether that's moral. But when it comes to something like marijuana or my pet we could do like 8 hours on psilocybin, which I'm obsessed with. But I don't understand the moral argument against that. Because if you're looking at that compared to alcohol, I know this goes aside from the business that we're talking about.
That's a good, yeah.
But it's, people would say, well, all the impaired people that you're going to have, and you're going to have, it leads to addiction, which none of it's true.
None of it's true.
And I think if you look at
and no one's died.
If you look at Colorado as a model, and say, what have they gone through as a state as far as crime and DUIs or driving under the influence, and they're not seeing any uptick in any of that.
And as
the statistics seem to speak for itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a matter of fact, and I don't know if I could say their name, but some pretty big healthcare, nationwide, maybe even some international healthcare companies are actually contacting us because they want data on how people and why people purchase specific kinds of products so that they can think about how they can use it in pharmaceutical. Like, can they actually provide Medicare, Medicaid, health insurance benefits towards using CBD cannabis as a regular treatment?
And CBD, and again, CBD, I think you also deal with hemp, which is kind of ridiculous because there's no, as far as I understand, hemp, which is the plant, is not even, you can't derive THC from that at all. Okay? That is something altogether different, and there's conspiracy theories as to why that was made illegal back in the 1920s.
There's a ton of those. We've heard them all, yeah.
It's really interesting.
But the hemp, they have the hemp fiber, the hemp cloth,
the
hemp
texture,
paper,
textile industry.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have production hemp, which really from the Farm Bill was the big one. So that from a production standpoint, people can produce hemp out of just testing and analysis, and they're still struggling to find banking relationships,
which is ridiculous because there's nothing. I think they got caught in the crossfire when it was made illegal back in the 1950s.
Yeah, and they're all pivoting back.
I don't think there's any such marijuana. There's no such thing as marijuana. That's just a word that was used. I think
we'll have to, we should maybe do one of these again in the future, because one of the board members of Solvent, his name's Eric Steenstra. He's the founder and president of Vote Hemp. And so he's one of like the OG hemp guys. I mean, he created a hemp clothing store back in like the early 90s, and then has been advocating for hemp ever since, and was a major contributor in the passage of the Farm Bill last year. But his stories of what it was like back in the day and how it is now is, I mean, it's an incredible story.
Yeah, he puts you in all.
It's gotten better.
It's insane. Yeah, I mean, he would say in 1991 in the Bay Area in California, he wanted to create a hemp clothing store, and he derived it all from Eastern Europe because he couldn't get hemp anywhere closer. So, and it was obviously super expensive, but it took off in 1991. I mean, he was super successful at the time with his partner, and it totally spurred this way of thinking of life and all the uses of it and the benefits of it, and he's been an advocate for it ever since.
But the problem is, and we're talking about things right now that people's minds are spinning probably, because we're talking about CBD,
3 different kinds of
CBD,
the same plant,
THC, and hemp, and they're 3 very different things that just get lumped together, and you have the politicians like these old senators, Mitch McConnell's going, it's all,
Well, actually, funny enough, we just posted a photo today on our social media of 2 flowers, one of them being CBD and the other one being THC.
So we're looking at 2 buds here.
THC's on the left.
THC's on the left?
Yeah.
THC's on the right.
Yeah. That's a good try. It wasn't even a shot. It was a good try. Yeah.
But I mean, as you can see,
so we're looking at the picture that Brian's holding up here, and they're indistinguishable.
Yeah, you can't tell.
Now, I've never seen marijuana before, just in pictures and stuff. So I'm just assuming.
So this is an example, because you technically can sell CBD flower. Most people aren't allowing it. As you can see, they look very similar, and unless you can verify the product, you have no idea the difference.
Right, and
on a quick look,
I give my kids the jellies, the CBD gel to sleep at night.
Yeah,
and I know that, and the studies are not conclusive yet, but they're very promising about ADHD and OCD and things like that.
I mean, that's another. I mean, gosh, there's so many topics you can talk about.
We're just like bam, bam, bam.
But it all comes down to the
whole scientific studies and the FDA controlling that. I mean, there are a lot of companies abusing the scientific meaning of certain products and mismarketing what products can do, because there's not yet any scientific data that supports that. It's peer reviewed, and
it's in a science journal.
Personally, I'm a believer in it, but again, you can't market it unless there's scientific facts around that. And some of these big companies that have gotten their product in the Rite Aids and the CVS's of the world are getting flagged right now by the FDA, and they need to push back on how they're promoting these products.
I'm glad they're doing that because I don't trust any of them, because I saw something that Amazon put out probably 2 weeks ago that said that they cannot guarantee the purity or the veracity or the efficacy, in fact, of any of the supplements that are sold on their site.
Yeah.
Which means that if you buy CBD oil or CBD gummies on Amazon, you may or may not be getting what you're supposed to be getting.
Enter Solvent.
Right.
That's just another example of like it's all about transparency.
I tell you what, why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, I want to talk about the individual products that you have under your company and how it's going to solve these problems.
Great. Cool.
September 28th, the second annual Twist and Stout Festival at Quiet Waters Park along the shores of the South River. Twist and Stout, a Maryland wine, craft beer, food, and arts festival presented by the Anne Arundel County Department of Recreation and Parks along with the Maryland Wineries Association. Sample dozens of craft beers and Maryland wines. There's music all day starring the Groove Spot Band along with the Naptown Brass Band and Vertigo Red. Watch the Plein Air Painters and shop dozens of artisans, crafters, and food trucks. Tickets are on sale now at twistandstout.org. That's TWISTANDSTOUT.org. September 28th, Twist and Stout at Quiet Waters Park, noon till 6. Tickets at twistandstout.org.
When you think of Watermark, you probably think of Harbor Queen. You know, the big white boat that sits down at the end of City Dock. But did you know that Harbor Queen is much more than just a visitor attraction? That thousands of local school children take field trips aboard it every year to learn about the Chesapeake Bay and our region's history. But that's not all you don't know about Watermark. When the Susquehanna River crested, washing thousands of tons of debris into our waterways, Watermark was there, rolling up their sleeves, helping the Annapolis harbor master clean up Ego Alley. And when the Annapolis Police Department SWAT team needed a boat to conduct special training exercises on to help protect our waters, they called Watermark. Watermark, making our mark. To learn more about how Watermark is here for our hometown, visit watermarkjourney.com.
And we're back, and we're here with Brian Meyer and Tony Richards, who are two of the 5 co-founders. We're talking about Solvent, IO.io, which is really sort of bridging the gap on how to transact in the cannabis industry, based straight out here in Annapolis.
Yeah.
So I got you guys off on my tangents.
No, that's okay. We'll go off on another one. I promise. Yeah.
But explain to us the products, because it's kind of abstract when you talk about the banking. And I'm not that versed in banking. All I know is that cannabis is becoming legal quickly in various ways, mostly medicinally so far. Yeah. However, the companies that are capitalizing on this are having problems with the money because of the federal regulations, or at least the interpretation of the federal regulations by the banks. Yeah. So it sounds to me that a lot of that is because there is not any way to track who's buying what, and to ensure security and what have you. So I'm vastly oversimplifying.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's a good way to say it. If you kind of put yourself in the shoes of like the FDIC or the NCUA regulator. The NCUA is the regulation body for credit unions, whereas FDC's for banks, and their whole job is to maintain a certain level of compliance. So they're going to come in and say, tell me everything you're doing. We call it the narrative. Tell me everything you're doing on your CRB accounts, cannabis-related business accounts, to maintain compliance. And they're not walking in with like a sheet of 100 questions. They're not walking in with this pre-notion of what they're going to expect.
But are those compliance requirements clear, or is that?
No, that's the problem. So because the federal government has not actually created those clear requirements that they request.
Because that's what happened in Maryland, is that when they were issuing the RFPs for the people, for the dispensaries and the growers and what have you, but there's a lot of confusion about what security they would need. Yeah. So it was a huge amount of confusion.
Yeah, it still is. Yeah, for sure. So the idea is so in the bank's mind, it's like, I'm doing this, but I want everything and I need to know everything, because if the FDIC or the regulator is going to come in and they feel like I don't have something, then I may be liable for that regulator's bad day, and he feels like that this is a problem or not, right? So I'm oversimplifying. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but
yeah, I'm not going to understand it.
Yeah, so to oversimplify it is basically what we do is we monitor all of the people involved at a company that is either in the business or touching the business.
So again, you are like, we joked about it, but it's like getting security clearance, except it's for the banking industry.
Yeah, and we do it.
So once they get the security clearance and they want to move to another company, they're already
in. Yeah, so they're already in, which is great. It's a great value, especially for like moving from bank to bank if you, whatever, for whatever reason. But the thing is for the banks, it's great because now we're doing something that they traditionally do, but we put it on steroids, but without actually affecting the merchant. So we're trying to make this as fast as possible to get merchants onboarded in a bank and all the information the bank needs to tell that story. And then we, for the bank, continue to monitor it, which is actually a unique concept. So most banks, after the bank's account's been opened, you can go commit a crime, a felony, and the bank wouldn't actually really ever know. They don't actually, unless you come back and I want a loan, then they'll find out.
Sure.
Or, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, I mean, if you just don't rock the boat, what do they know?
Right. And the problem is that if there were to be public record for some felony that or misdemeanor with possession or something that's illegal to the bank or the regulating body, the bank's going to be held liable for it. Which is why Maryland's now passing those laws. You can only have so many dispensaries that you can own, and every employee can't have a criminal record, and all these different things to figure out some way to put pressure more and more on those who are taking the risk, and in our mind, the bank's taking the most. So that's one piece of the.
I mean, they're all about mitigating their risk. I mean, I know. I used to own several travel agencies, and if we took a credit card and manually tapped in the card to the thing. If that card, if they declined it, if the client said, "Hey, that wasn't me," or it was wrong, or it was fraudulent or stolen, that's 100% on me. It wasn't. If I swipe it, it's a different story. And whether you got a signature or not, there were some varying degrees of it, but it's all about mitigating their own risk.
Absolutely, yeah. They're all good making their 8% on the 90% loanable income that they have, and that's that. But there are some really cool, innovative CEOs who are ahead of these media. I call them medium-sized or small in the financial world, between 1.5 billion and down to 500 million in assets that really want to take this industry. They don't make a lot of money to begin with. They've kind of maxed out on their loans in their community. They can see of solving a community safety issue and then also generate more revenue for the bank and allow them to provide more services that they can't currently offer.
So what's the technology that's involved in this?
Yeah, so...
Because I keep seeing blockchain come up, and I always nod, and I'm going blockchain.
Yeah, blockchain.
I want you to explain blockchain.
Yeah, everything's blockchain.
Blockchain.
and that's the other question, too, before you get into that.
Yeah.
Wouldn't cryptocurrency just solve this whole problem?
Well, it changes one problem for another, right? Because in a crypto, I don't know who the buyer or the seller is.
Yeah, but neither does the government at that point.
Well, true, fair enough. But then it just adds a whole other layer of, you've got so many people that have so much cryptocurrency to be able to, which they're currently doing in the dark web now, is like you could go and buy cannabis all day long using crypto and get away with it. It in theory solves the problem, but in a bank size, it increases the complexity of that problem because now the crypto's exchanging money and the bank doesn't know where that money came from to buy the original crypto, and then to sell that crypto, where's that money now going to? Because at the end of the day, here's what the bank does. So when you're a merchant, you've already signed up for the account, they're going to do something called the enhanced due diligence. And every month, they're going to take, there's two systems that they talk to. They're going to take the receipts from your point of sale, and they're going to take the receipts from Metric. Metric is the largest and most state sanctioned logistics ERP inventory purchasing system in the country.
Well, just to dive a little deeper into that. So the state of Maryland uses Metric, and Metric, it tracks the seed to sale. So when they plant
seed to sale,
seed to sale. So when the grows plant their seeds, they get a Metric tag, and the state of Maryland,
which is like that social security number.
Yeah,
for
and
that.
the state, you're exactly right. So they track the movement of that plant from the minute it is in the ground to the minute someone buys at a dispensary.
So it's not like corn or anything else where you just have we have 20 bushels and we're selling it for X amount of dollars. They know every single plant and the yield of that plant and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so from seed, they get its social security number, and then as it grows, then you can weigh it and calculate its value, what have you.
Mm-hmm. And the process, the lab, the spectrum analysis.
What cracks me up about all the regulations and the processes that are established for this is I was talking off record to a dispensary owner. I said, well, how do you get these delivered from the processor? And he says, usually it's a guy, he's got it in the back of his truck.
It's a guy. It's a guy in a Civic. Right. That's exactly right.
That's just crazy.
Yeah, and they're paying cash. Like some of these big manufacturing processing companies are paying $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in a briefcase. Thanks for the product. It's unreal.
See, and that to me, you would think the feds would be,
That's a bigger
and the
problem.
states would be most interested in all this just from the tax revenues alone.
Yeah.
We're talking about a lot of money now, and it's increasing exponentially every year. So, it'd be in their best interest to capture as much revenue and kind of nail down these regulations and open it up. And if it's going to be made,
why not?
If it's going to be made legal anyway, you're going to want to kind of capitalize on any of the taxes from sales. So there just seems to be leaving money on the table.
At this point where I don't know the exact number, but I think we're up to like 33 or 34 states that have at least medical program. Or I'm sorry, was it medical or CBD? CBD
program.
CBD. It's really only a matter of time, right? So if you know it's going to happen, you should just probably get on the boat and start your program now, because what's going to happen is you're going to be left behind as a state, and the money's going to another state.
Don't you see parallels between this and when gambling just kind of blew up about 15 years ago? Mm-hmm. That I didn't think gambling was going to be legalized, and as soon as one state legalized it, the neighboring states.
Yeah,
well, that is what's going to happen. So within, especially in the Mid-Atlantic region,
except for there wasn't a black market for gambling really, and there is a black market for marijuana, even in states that have it legalized, just because they have a lower price point.
Yeah. So before it goes federally legal, what's going to happen? So as an example, say Pennsylvania goes recreational. New Jersey and Maryland, just like that, are going to go recreational because they don't want people going out of the state to buy product. They want that tax money to stay in the state.
Jeez,
so it's going to be a domino effect.
The state that I always thought just missed the boat on all this was West Virginia, which is, I think it's the poorest state in the union.
Well,
they'd be the one in.
Yeah, they're just getting their program off the ground. Last I saw on the news that their program won't be fully operational till 2021.
You figure if they were the ones to go recreational in the Mid-Atlantic, they would capture all that revenue. I think
they can use it.
Yeah, they're the poorest state in the union, and you figure that they would take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. But then again, I think we run back into that moralistic sort of where people, it's a vaguely moralistic thing where people don't know why they object to it,
right?
Because it's certainly not only is it not as harmful as alcohol, it's not even close to as harmful as alcohol is. That's
it's actually beneficial.
Yeah, and all the studies that I've seen.
Right, yeah.
But all right, so from seed to sales, right? Yep. So each plant is given an identification number of some sort.
Yeah. So what a bank does is when a dispensary purchases and a product sold in a dispensary, it catalogs in two places: the point of sale and the inventory system called metric. So what a bank does to validate that there's no money laundering or evasion or fraud happening in the dispensary, they take the receipts from the point of sale and they take the inventory reduction in metric, and they compare them. And the amount sold in metric needs to be within a certain degree of difference from the amount sold in the point of sale. If not, then they're out of compliance, and they can actually lose their accounts within 30 days from that. Mm-hmm. So that's it's another thing the bank's doing to make sure that everything's legal in areas that they can't control, right? Which is inside the dispensary. And then the next side of that, going back to Elevon, especially in e-commerce, we don't know what the product is. Amazon has that problem. If you buy a Gucci bag from Amazon, do you really know it's Gucci, or are there reviews telling you that it's validated or not, right? So what we do is we connect to all the labs. We don't have all of them, but we're working on connecting to all the labs so that when we get that receipt data from that transaction, we can check against.
And it's verified.
And verify it, right? So it's not an exact science, but this is where machine learning comes in, where you look at images that they use to create the products. You look at all the product SKUs. You look at what people purchase on a regular basis over a long period of time. And then what it does is unsupervised learning takes all this information in and then defines what the anomalies are. And which is hugely valuable, actually not that sophisticated technology that a bank can actually see, okay, well, these are things I should probably look at. Because traditionally in a bank, look at an Excel ledger of all the transactions that come in across all their accounts, and then they're going to derive their own analysis from like pivot tables, and maybe there's some something they can throw information in to do a background check quickly, an identity check, or something along those lines. What we like to do is actually give the bank that technology. Like, banks are antiquated. It's crazy. They have so much responsibility in the community, as part of like being a capitalistic society, yet their technology is stuff I've seen when I started in this industry 10, 15 years ago. Like, I can't tell you, outside of the Capital One, Bank of America, JP Morgans of the world, which maybe even they're a little bit debatable, these midterm banks are spending $300,000-$400,000 in licensing for technology that was probably built using .NET DOS, which is something that was created 10, 15 years ago. And that technology is maintained by a company, like, for example, FIS just bought WorldPay for $43 billion. And I actually had a chance to experience that technology. And I'm not trying to diss FIS. I mean, they've done a lot to innovate for sure. But in this particular bank, they're using antiquated technology. And it was unreal. They're using key commands on a keyboard to open up an account, and it's that old school blue and white, and they're coming down and clicking on. It's crazy.
That's how I started in school, I think, back in the 70s.
There you go. So I digress on that, but we just found it as a huge opportunity. We actually got in this industry just trying to solve the merchant services problem and realized, well, it's not a merchant service problem; it's a bank problem. So we've digressed back down to the weeds and trying to like audit as many banks as we possibly can to understand the problem in the most detailed way possible. And we're building these little, what they call microservices environment, where we're just trying to solve specific problems. And we realize as we're trying to solve these problems for the banks so that they can feel more comfortable, they all talk to each other. So now they have this dashboard where I can see transactions that are coming in, I can see products that are coming in, I can see what wires and ACHs are being sent and received to who. Does it happen often? I can do all this analysis on crazy stuff like most peak times at a dispensary for purchasing certain types of products, or most popular bud tender that gets the most sales during a certain period of time. Like, there's just so much you can learn. Yeah. And obviously we're not trying to store those people. We don't really care who the person is specifically, like Tony Richards. I don't care. It's Tony Richards. I just care, is he being compliant? Is he maintaining regular?
So your customer is pretty much, it's a vertical thing. I mean, you're looking at the growers, the processors, the dispensaries, as well as the consumer to a degree.
Yeah.
All the way up to...
Yeah, I mean, we solved the problem for the banks first. We're a banking product, and any business, cannabis, CBD, hemp-related in their ecosystem is now a customer of Solvent's as well. So it's kind of how it works.
How did you all get together? Who came up with this idea, and did it involve alcohol? Most of the best ones do.
It's that's a long story in itself. So in a nutshell...
Because some of you had some background in this already.
Yeah, so Tony has 10 plus years experience building enterprise level software from scratch, idea to realization, working product, and he can talk about that. But so him and Nikki, our CEO, founders of Pillars for Digital, have been doing that in Annapolis. The other two individuals, Adam Gifford and Jason Barker, are our cannabis industry section of the company. They have own grows, they own a dispensary, they own the first registered cannabis museum in the United States in Durango, Colorado, right on Main Street. They've sold pretty much every ancillary...
the snack bar at that place must kill it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, probably.
They sell pretty much every ancillary product you could sell in the industry. I mean, they're just a wealth of knowledge. They have a network bigger than I can even dream of in this industry. And so they have our cannabis industry experience. Myself, I handle all the biz developments, so marketing, communications. Previously from Solvent, kind of how we all got stitched together is I founded and ran a company called Capital Sup, which is a local stand-up paddleboarding and water sports company in Annapolis. And through that, I met Adam, who used to work. Funny enough, used to work at the pavilion at Capital Sup where the marina was. And his girlfriend worked for me at Capital Sup. And I started seeing him, and I'm a very curious individual, and I kept asking her, I was like, hey, who's this guy? Like, what's he doing? He must be doing something because he's always on his damn laptop. And she finally told me what he did.
He's working on his manifesto.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
And so I walked over there, started chatting him up, and him and I became really good friends. And a positive and negative of Capital Sup was that I had freedom to do other things because it was seasonal, but also too, like I was always juggling multiple things at once. And so I've been able to structure my day pretty well off of being able to maintain different things at once. But anyway, so we got connected. He founded and invested in a cannabis point of sale company called TH Sweet. And that's how I that's how I entered the cannabis market, is I came on board and helped him create the market on the East Coast, and I believe there's up to 15 dispensaries now in the state that use TH Sweet, and I was a pivotal part of helping get into the door. And so through that experience, we saw clearly the two biggest problems in cannabis are banking and payments. And there are a lot of other companies, again, what Tony mentioned earlier, creating specific problems to put a Band-Aid over the real problem, not to create the whole solution, which is building the ecosystem of products that we've been talking about. Right. And I was like, there's only one person that I know of, or probably in the state of Maryland, that could build something like this, and his name's Tony Richards, because people of his ability are usually or are working at like the Google and Facebooks and the Amazons of the world, leading those companies. And so what's interesting about him and Nikki is that they've been doing this by themselves for ages, and what's unique about our company is that they've literally built everything. And so we've been able to accelerate our growth as a company because of their past of being able to really pivot and do all sorts of different technology builds. And so, it's super important to have the leader of the company, Tony, having that engineering background, because from a technical perspective, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the core of what we do. We have great branding, we have great marketing, we have great communication, we have a great network, but if you don't have the technology, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. And that's what we have.
It's so easy for marketing to get ahead of the technology. To have it, I mean, you look at that with Comcast or Verizon when they have some great new service, and it's phenomenal, and then you get it, the guy that install
this is it, really? Yeah.
Right.
Jeez.
I'm in marketing, and just everyone always hated me for that. Yeah. So just like, all right, let's manage some expectations here, take it down a notch.
Tony, why aren't you with Amazon or?
Yeah, in the bowels of somewhere.
Why are we here at 209 West Street on the
drinking Mountain Dew and microdosing? Yeah.
So it happened early. So my mom was a single mom, it's just her and I. And during the summers, my grandmother worked at Bell South, and it was in D.C. And we would basically, I'd spend my summers with her, and I'd go to work with her every day. And she was the executive assistant to the CEO of Bell South at the time. And I could tell you probably it went from I was there when I could barely walk to I ended up being Santa Claus for all the other kids during their Christmas meeting. I mean, I was pretty much ingrained in their culture at that point. But I was always fascinated with the dealings that were always happening and the conversations that were had, 'cause you can hear them in the other room. And it was just an astonishing feeling to see people come together and innovate and think through problems and argue and be pissed off and then come back and be happy with each other. It was just that, and the environment and the family that was created at Bell South while I was there was unforgettable. So that always made me want to drive to be like the CEO that my grandmother worked for, because he was such an adorned man. And then it really hit me. When I was 16 years old, I worked for Rod and Reel. Do you guys know that in Chesapeake Beach? Yeah. So I was
still there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still there. It's great. So I was a first mate. I was also dock master. I was also crabber. I was also the person behind the cook at Smokey Joe's. So my days would end up, I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get there in time, and there were always the same 4 old guys standing outside who would be waiting for me to open the doors to the tackle shop, because they were ready to go fishing. They were there every single day, and they would come in, they would make coffee, and they would take the cheddar Cracker Barrel cheese out of the refrigerator and start cutting up Cracker Barrel cheese in the coffee. And the stories they read, I mean, these guys were actually quite innovative for the time. One of the guys was in like 3 or 4 different wars. Another guy, he was one of the guys that created some technology on doors. And it was another one of those experiences where I became really good friends with these guys. And it was motivating during a time where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I ended up working 5 or 6 different jobs to the point where they had to make me stop working because I was making so much overtime. And I realized at that point, if I was really going to accelerate and innovate and be doing some really cool stuff and become that person that my grandmother worked for, I probably shouldn't do that working for somebody else. So that's always been my motivating driver of trying to do it on my own. And I just love Annapolis. Like I love sailing. I love the historical town. I love the people, traditionally, most of them. And there's actually quite a bit of innovation in Annapolis. And believe it or not, I mean, DC, Baltimore, comes right into it. And a lot of my clients were out of DC, Baltimore, New York, Philly, and then just hopping on a train and being there for a meeting, it's almost like I'm there anyway. So it wasn't really a deterrent. Right. But it's cool. I mean, it's kind of like my kind of pace, and it's a place I've been laying my roots.
And your base, your other company that you founded or that you were working, what is that one? That's also based here as well, right? You do the technology development, or have you switched purely to...
So that's Pillister. So that's what I was doing. Yep. So software engineering, basically we thrived mostly on custom software that you can't get off a shelf, solving unique problems that, we just came in and we basically were anything to anybody, right? So we were just trying to figure out ways to innovate and do it for our clients rather than for ourselves. And after 10 years of doing it, we realized we probably aren't going to get where we want just doing client work. And it was actually a great time when we met with Brian. We were looking for opportunities to take all this knowledge and technical know-how to innovate ourselves and create our own thing. And it was such a serendipitous moment. It's almost like, it's crazy. So the 5 founders, we've got 15 years derivatives trader as our operations guy. We got a guy who basically created the main pharmaceutical healthcare device market in the greater DC area. We have Brian, who I'm sure you've all seen the Capital sub stickers on every car. Absolutely. You got Nikki, who is an amazing user experience person. Like, she's done pretty much everything from AAA to Carnival Cruise Lines to branding DC, branding the country of Mexico. Like, she's just, all of us coming together was just like, wow, we should really try to do this and do it right. And, we got into, like you said, we got into the merchant services side and realized that's not right, even though we had an opportunity to take other technology and run with it. And we ended up in a really cool spot. We're getting a lot of notoriety. We actually met with Silicon Valley Bank this morning, who actually came to the Commons here to talk to us about it. And we actually also 2 weeks ago are going to be the subject matter expert for behind the scenes with Florence Fishburne. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Yeah. So they're doing a whole series on the industrialization of hemp and the problems that it's having in the country.
Fantastic.
And we're going to be the subject matter expert for that to kind of help, the guide the story and message of the great, wonderful things about the plant.
Yeah, but first you're going to be here on the Maryland Crabs podcast.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I would love that.
Honestly, it's you guys might feel like you're smaller in a sense of that, but really, like, for us as a company, like, and we've said this publicly to basically everyone we talk to, is again, like, we all love Annapolis. We all live here, and again, as our company evolves, I'm sure obviously we might not be here. I don't have an answer for that, but we want to put a flag in the ground that, hey, we're from Maryland. We live in Annapolis. I mean, we're all water enthusiasts. The core of our genesis of our company is based around the water. And, we see an opportunity because we see that this company can get to levels that many companies haven't been in this area, to be able to showcase the talent and the representation of the city and the state, to say, hey, we're Solvent. We're from Maryland. We're located in Annapolis. Come see us.
20 years from now, I want to go on to solvent.io and see. Solvent was founded in 2019 in Annapolis, Maryland.
Yeah, I love that.
Depending on where it is.
If it was up to us, I don't know if the city will allow it, but I'm going to talk to them, is I want to have a floating corporation, to where our corporation is on a floating barge that is just docked right
so you can
outside
offshore
of
your
Annapolis.
company.
That's called an
offshore the company, right. The tax breaks.
Well, they did that out west. Because they had with the immigration status, and I think it was in San Francisco. I think
was
that had done that because they had a lot of people coming in from China, and there was to do the technology. Their visas were expiring, but they didn't want to give them up and send them back, so they actually created barges to
offshore
to house these people.
20 miles offshore.
Was it really?
I don't know.
Oh, wow.
It was about 10 years ago. It was kind of fantastic.
That's amazing. I love Google for that reason.
If you're in the cannabis industry, Solvent.io, and I want to thank Brian Meyer, I want to thank Tony Richards and Nikki Rogers, Jason Barker,
Adam Gifford.
Did I get that right?
Yep.
I didn't screw that up?
No, you did it. Jason Barker.
Damn it. And Adam Gifford, who are not here. But I look forward to seeing where this goes. This is exciting times. I mean, I think there's so much opportunity here. I mean, I think we ought to get a wager going. When is marijuana going to be recreationally legal here in Maryland?
Rec illegal. Okay.
Let's see. Well,
they already have a group of people at the Maryland Chamber of Commerce or whatever organization it is actively looking at what that looks like. And so I think in the state of Maryland next year it's gonna.
What month?
Advanced.
I think next year it's going to advance. To be honest with you, that's my prediction in the state of Maryland.
Right.
What month?
What month?
What's a wager?
The session usually happens in the first part of the year. So I would say, in March.
I like it.
Bold move.
Bold.
We'll see.
Bold move. Hey, thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them at all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home.